Story 1. The Rotunda. Most people who choose to go hiking do so in the summer or spring, but some of my college friends and I tend to prefer hiking in the winter after our final arduous semester of college. Our small gang of 3 decided to go on a road trip to the Great Smoky Mountains and try some hiking there. Jack was applying to law school in Knoxville, and so was using this trip both for the hike and to get a sense of his school of interest. He had spiked black hair, a small patch of facial hair under his lip, and green eyes, which made him popular with some ladies in our university. Craig was looking to become a park ranger, and looked like he was meant for the wild, with fuzzy brown hair and an extensive box beard. This story isn't about something scary we encountered in the woods or some monster hiding in the trees. The hike was actually fun, rewarding, and relaxed, though a bit cold. This is what happened in a small town we stayed in on the base of the mountains. After the hike, the town was designed for those hikers who choose to come in the spring and summer. The main street was filled with all sorts of attractions for people who were interested in the beautiful nature all around, but did not want to actually venture into the hiking trails. There were cable cars to high-altitude convention centers, arcade, bowling alleys, driving trails, carnival-like games, and a haunted house. After the hike, my friends and I decided to spend an extra day exploring these attractions. To me, the whole town had an eerie aura, which was accentuated by the lack of tourists and the winter months. Though everything was open, there simply were no people on the streets other than us and maybe a few other winter hikers and the rare locals. After riding the cable car for a spectacular sunset view of the mountains, we argued about whether to call it a night. Always looking for a fun fright, I recommended we venture to the haunted house. My friends considered it childish, but I said I was going to go anyway and meet them back at the hotel. That was a very bad mistake. The haunted house had a strange setup. There was no front door, rather a gondola leading up to a door on the second story. From the outside it looked like the house was made of concrete painted to look like old wood, reminiscent of the entrance to an old mine or a tunnel. The building was very clearly a commercial haunted house. I could even see the pop-out skeletons and departmentess tour-like special effects around the door in the second story, and there were buildings with other known scary attractions all around the haunted house. All this helped alleviate my fears. I never intended to go it alone, but after waiting for 5 minutes, the person manning the entrance booth realized that no one else was going to join me. I gave him the $20 entrance fee and told him considering it's a winter evening and there are barely any tourists around, I might as well go in alone. I was feeling overconfident and told him that I don't scare easily. At that moment, as something changed, the man, who was wearing a clownish outfit and had straight brown hair flowing to one side of his head, changed his expression from bored to somber. His brown eyes pierced mine, and he muttered under his breath, "You shouldn't say that. You shouldn't do this alone." Immediately after, he smiled and used an intercom system to let the actors inside know that a young male is coming in. I heard the actors ask if I was alone, and he confirmed it. There was dead silence. One of the actors repeated through the intercom, so that I could hear, "You shouldn't say that. You shouldn't do this alone." run through the rotunda. I've been to a number of haunted houses, and this seemed unusual. Something didn't sit right with me, but I chalked it up to an early scare tactic they were using before I even entered the house. The man told me the ground rules: no touching the actors. Proceed forward at a steady pace. If you give up and need it to end early, yell at the top of your lungs to stop. Yeah, yeah. I've heard this all before. Then the man grabbed me and looked at me very sternly. Run through the rotunda. Enough, I was getting sick of this scared tactic. I took the gondola and entered through the second-floor door. At first everything played out like a typical commercial haunted house. There were dark hallways, pop-out monsters, and hands of actors reaching for me through the walls. Having never done this alone, I did start getting scared, with my heart rate increasing and sweat coming off my palms. But it was a fun kind of fear. There was a crawl space, totally lightless, and the actors, violating their own rules, grabbed my legs and activated a chainsaw, probably fake, as to cut them off. I desperately lunged forward out of the crawl space into a room with brilliant purple lights rotating around a platform that seemed to be shaking. Disoriented, I took a few seconds to recuperate and recognized that it was an optical illusion. A cylindrical background wallpaper was rotating so fast as to make a walkway in the center look unstable. Confident, I went across the walkway to a door and opened it. The following room was a large circular room with a dome on the top, a rotunda. It was dark, but there was enough light for me to make out a door on the far side. What was unusual was that the room was very different from the rest of the rooms in the building. Instead of a black Velcro-like material covering the walls were ornate with red marble and statues of deformed faces and broken bird wings. As the room felt hot, and there was black liquid streaming out of a hole in the ceiling. I remembered the warnings earlier, and a shiver went down my spine. I started to run to the door on the far end, but I had spent too much time looking at the surroundings. Suddenly, everything became pitch black, except for a faint red light radiating out of the column of black liquid in the center. I tried to keep my trajectory to the door, but it was locked now. Another shiver went down my spine. That's when I started to hear voices all around me. At first I thought they were the actors, and they kept repeating my name. Kenneth, Kenneth, Kenneth. I couldn't see. I couldn't feel anything. I could only hear my name. I thought back to the man at the entrance. See, at no point did I reveal my name. None of this made sense. I chickened out and shouted stop, but the voices didn't stop. I took out my phone. It was 8:33 p.m., and I had no reception. The voices wouldn't stop, and the room was getting hotter and hotter. I shouted, "Why are you doing this?" I yelled, "Stop." Around me I heard male and female voices in unison. I started hearing words and phrases other than my name. Troy abandoned, Clara unreciprocated, malfeasance wins. Now I was terrified. Troy is the name of the town in New Hampshire I was born in. My family moved to New York City, when I was young, where I grew up and went to school. Clara was my first crush, though nothing ever came of my lust for her. Malfeasance was the word by which I won a small spelling bee in my show. Oh, I began to shake at these words, and the room began to feel even hotter. But now the heat was starting to localize to my right hand and was becoming very painful. I cried out for this to stop and tried to knock down the locked door out of the rotunda to no avail. I pulled out my phone, but it wasn't working. The voices continued in a lowered tone, a burning hand, a broken face, a broken wing. As these words were uttered, my hand, in extreme pain, began to cool down. When I was in school, I burned my hand in an oven. I had also been in a stupid fist fight with a classmate, he overcutting a line in a cafeteria, which ended with both of us breaking each other's noses. More recently, on a drive to a job interview in Chicago, I ran over a wounded bird on the highway. I felt terrible and remember the image of the bird's deformed wing. I tried closing my ears, but the voices only got louder. Heights, anger, loss. These words I did not recognize, but the lowering, booming tones of the voices kept me shuddering. The danger. At this point, the black liquid emanating the faint light began to transform from a stream into a blob. The liquid grew and started taking the shape of a human being. Once the shaping was complete, the liquid changed color. In front of me was a man with green eyes and straight black hair. He had a soul patch and was wearing a suit with a red tie. A knife materialized in his right hand. No words can express the terror I felt at that moment. With sweat falling down my forehead, with my heart racing so fast and so powerfully that I could feel my chest wall vibrate, and with my muscles trembling and shaking, I begged not to die. The man in the center of the room didn't move, but he stared directly at me, coldly, robotically. I was too afraid to look away from his green eyes. I felt a sharp stabbing pain in my chest, the worst pain I have ever felt in my life. I screamed, I cried. Then the figure dematerialized, and the room lit up to the level of light there was when I first entered. I lunged for the door with no hesitation, and it swung open. The moment I stepped out of the rotunda, the pain stopped. The rest of the haunted house was completely lit. There were no actors, but there were deactivated pop-out monsters. I traversed twisted corridors similar to those before the rotunda, but lit up and featureless. I exited through a door in the back of the haunted house. I took out my phone, which was working again. It was 10 p.m. This didn't make sense. I knew I spent no more than 20 minutes in there. I was shaking, terrified, and angry. I ran to the front of the haunted house, but there was no one there, nowhere. Curs, no entrance booth personnel, no actors. I went back to the hotel, swearing to myself to keep the whole affair secret to anyone other than the internet. The next morning, I told my friends to give me one more hour before we head up to Knoxville. I went back to the haunted house. It looked the same as it did when I first entered, and there was a man at the entrance booth. He looked at me unimpressed, and did not appear to be the same man who greeted me last time. I began yelling and screaming, asking what kind of a sick joke they pulled on me last night, and how they discovered so much about me. He told me that it's been a slow season, and no one came to the house last night. I felt enraged, and he threatened to call the police. Feeling defeated and upset, I headed back to the hotel. In the room, Jack was packing some stuff excitedly and jittery. There was a nasty smell in the room, but after the sensory overload last night, I was done analyzing. "Where's Craig?" I asked. "Oh, he's out prepping the car. Do you like the suit? I'm excited for Knoxville." Just in case I have to impress anyone. I think I'm going to straighten my hair. D. Oh, you think I should go for a red or blue tie? Story 2. Roommates. The second Daryl's keys were rattling in the lock, Katie was off the couch and racing to the front door. Did you do it? Did you do it? She was practically bouncing up and down with giddy anticipation and unwilling to give him a second to even breathe. Did you kill her? Is it done? Daryl couldn't help but to ask, smile and shake his head. She was such a bad influence on him. He tried to remember the first time they had met, but for some reason was unable to. It just kind of seemed like she had always been there. Tim and Jerry had been his roommates for close to 8 years, and somewhere along the way she just kind of fell in with the twin brothers. Before Daryl knew what happened, she was living in the little 2-bedroom house as well. Remembering when the guys moved in was a little easier. He had liked them both immensely the first time they had met and fell hard for their sob story of growing up as orphans with no real family other than each other. That wasn't the real reason he extended the invitation, however. The truth was they were fun, age-wise. They were technically adults, but their maturity level in no way reflected that. Neither of them ever bothered growing up, and there was really no telling what they might be getting into at any point in time. Plus, they really had to play up the identical twin aspect and enjoy going with the same look as each other every day. Daryl could tell them apart. At the moment, Tim's hair was just a bit shorter than Rise, but most people didn't have a clue. Tim had told him once, quite some time ago, the story of how they'd met Katie in the area, but Daryl really didn't retain it. Tim had verbal diarrhea, and a different story or 10 every day. It would have been impossible to try and keep them all in the memory banks. Tim's condition was aided considerably by the fact that he always had a bag of green herbs nearby. Jerry wasn't quite the stoner his brother was, but he did partake from time to time. Daryl hadn't complained when Katie started hanging around. There was something about her that he found truly compelling, and it wasn't that he had the hots for her or anything like that. She was not at all his type, but she was sweet and funny and an absolute dynamo of highly contagious positive energy. He loved the way that she kept them all in line and yet on their toes at the same time. For all these reasons, and others that he didn't fully understand, she could talk him into practically anything, as he had an innate ability to persuade him into activities that most people would consider irrational, and a way of making sense out of it in the process. That's the way it was with Julie, his soon-to-be-deceased ex-girlfriend, and Marcus, his recently deceased ex-best friend. As crushing a blow as discovering their secret liaison was, Daryl was originally going to just break off both relationships and decount his blessings that he discovered the infidelity when he did, and not further down the road when she might have been his wife and he might have been his best man. It had been Katie who finally got him to see the reasoning behind ending their lives. They were, after all, bad people. Who knows who else they would have ended up hurting in the long run. It was the same then. With Yuri Milosh, the Ukrainian guy who used to live down the street that swindled Daryl out of nearly $3,000 in his Ponzi scheme. How many little old ladies would he have cleaned out before someone in alley stopped him? Then there was Pritchett. Ricketts, the prick who kept pinching his clients by undercutting his offers on jobs. Darrow was one of the best small job carpenters in the area, but somehow that damn Ricketts was always on his tail. It was Katie that pointed out that the unscrupulous man must have been following Darrow. It also stood to her reasoning that there was no possible I of just cutting Leach out of his life other than killing him, of course. Father Mitchner was the only one Errol tried putting up a significant argument against, and even now it weighed on his conscience. Father Andrew Mitchner had been the pastor at the local Catholic church for nearly 40 years before he passed on. Darrell's grandmother, who left the little house to him when she died, attended services there twice a week, every week, until she died, and the priest had grown fondly attached to the long-time widow. When Darrell moved in 9 years ago, Father Mitchner had he at a point to visit the home and check in on Doris's grandson, and Darrow quite liked the pleasant man. Not enough to attend his church, but he did like him. It was Tim and Jay, Harry, who initially didn't care for him the first time they met. The father made a light-hearted joke about them being freeloaders who didn't pay rent, and despite the lack of malicious intent, the guys, who never took offense at anything, had their feeling hurt. That was really no big deal. But the priest continued to make weekly recruiting visits, and eventually Katie was the one to see the demons in him. Absolutely terrified the first time she saw the man and the creatures possessing him from within. She later explained that the gift was called discernment, and that she had always been able to see unclean spirits. Darrow fought her for some time on the issue, but her fear was real, and Katie never lied to him, or anyone for that matter. She was truthful to a brutal fault, and in the end, he believed in a world beyond the one he could. He believed that Katie had gifts that he didn't, and, above all, he believed her when she said they would be plagued by demonic attacks if the poor man wasn't put out of his misery. It was, by her estimation, a mercy-killing. Darrow had been hoping that moment of bestowed mercy would be the last time he would have to deal with such unpleasant things, but here he was again. So she pressed, "Are you going to answer me, or what?" Darrow chuckled again and pushed past her to the living room. "Are you going to give me a chance to actually answer?" Katie feigned offense behind him and said, "Well, excuse me." By all means, Tim and Jerry were wrestling with each other on the couch like a cool play of teenage boys, and didn't bring it to an end until Darrow plopped down on the couch next to them, diverting their attention. "Well," Jerry asked what they were all thinking. "He hasn't said." Katie had positioned herself on the lazy boy across from them. "For some reason he's trying to play it cool, which," she paused for effect, "is not cool." The brothers began to fall all over each other with raucous laughter, which brought Darrell's attention to the empty baggie and green herbs strung about the coffee table. They were high as kites. Sometimes living with those two was like being in a frat hole. S.E. or having children, maybe. He definitely didn't take them as seriously as he did his female roommate. "Well," Darrow finally spoke, "not that you two yahoos will remember." Later, he was looking at the twins, and they fell into another round of side-splitting. "But, yeah, I did it. I cut her brake line." Katie's jaw dropped. "You cut her brake line?" she repeated. Darrow proudly nodded yes, but the pride only lasted a moment before Katie made her displeasure known. "What the hell, Darrow? That's not what we talked about. You were supposed to poison her or stab her Where the hell did you come up with cutting the brake line? She sigh, exasperated. How do you even know which one is the brake line? YouTube. Darrow replied sheepishly. I looked it up. The brothers couldn't stop laughing, Jerry actually falling to the floor and holding his sides. Katie didn't find it funny at all. You looked up a video on how to cut a brake line and then you went and cut someone's brake line. Please tell me you at least used a guest account on a computer somewhere else. She seemed like she couldn't even believe she was having to ask, and it was the complete opposite of the reaction he had been expecting, especially when he could only mumble, I used my phone. Katie jumped across to the couch and slapped him in the face, drawing blood. Why? Her nails, you fucking idiot, she yelled in his face. You've screwed us all. Tim joined his brother, rolling on the floor as neither seemed to grasp why Katie was so upset. What are we supposed to do when you get arrested? Darrow was genuinely shocked. Why would he be arrested? I don't understand, was all he could say, and Katie shook her head with sick pity, but was not given the opportunity to explain. The next few seconds passed in a blur. Broken glass filled the room from the windows, and chunks of wood flew in from the hall where the front door had been smashed from its hinges. Suddenly the room was full of men in black armor, from head to tail, flashing lights and screaming, violently thrown to the floor and handcuffed. Darrow couldn't see what condition his roommates were in. Much like him, they were probably overwhelmed by this sudden flurry of activity. Jerked to his feet and hustled down the hall. He knew that he would probably be in some degree of trouble, but he truly hoped that his friends wouldn't be charged with anything. He didn't see them being cuffed, and his name was the only one they stated as being under arrest and Mirandized, so hopefully the why could be left out of whatever mess this turned into. As he was being pulled out the front door, Darrow called out over his shoulder, desperately hoping they could hear him. Don't say anything, guys, don't say a word. By that point, it was the best he could do. An hour later, he was behind bars, barring the death penalty for the rest of his life. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Toya Pearson couldn't help but to curse when the call came in at 1:45 in the morning. Raising two girls as a single mom combined with a job that could call at any moment. As the current call proved, sleep was proving more and more elusive. The moment the ringtone woke her from deep sleep, she knew she was done for the night. She didn't even have to answer it. It did, however, turn out to be a rather interesting call, though. The department had arrested a rather notorious serial killer. Not that it wasn't good news. One less sicko on the streets was good for everybody, but that wasn't the part that particularly interested her. It was his pets, normally. The rare personality that fell into his range didn't keep pets. Not living ones anyway. But this man had 3 cats which were currently in the kennel at headquarters. Were it not such a high-profile case, the animals would have most likely been turned over to animal control or the Humane Society. But given the uniqueness of the situation, they to call her. Toya's official title was that of a detective profiler. But everyone knew that her true passion was her feline rescue group. No one had a problem turning Katie, Tam, and Jerry over to her, and rather that put them through further trauma, she decided to keep them in the end. They won her over rather quickly with their infectious personalities, and her girls fell in love immediately as well. The youngest, Sarah even claims that they speak to her. It's adorable. Story 3. The disappearance and reappearance of Michael Vinson. It's been a month since Michael returned. He was gone for more than 4 years, and now he has finally come back. The only thing is, he isn't the same anymore. I understand that. It's been for years, of course. He has changed. It's in the way he changed that's odd. He barely ever smiles anymore. Only ever gives off the occasional hint of a smile. Then it's quickly suppressed, and a blank, emotionless mass. Kate takes its place. Sometimes when we hang out, he would suddenly panic and start screaming and hitting himself in the chest and legs uncontrollably, and that usually goes on for a couple of minutes at the very least. Even though he still is my best friend, I'm afraid to be with him alone for what he might do. I'm not necessarily afraid that he would try to hurt me. It's that if he tries to hurt himself, I don't trust myself to be able to help him. Michael has been on TV many times since returning. Every news station and talk show were all over him for the first couple of weeks, offering a lot of money for him to be on their show before he appeared on any other. His parents were very against the idea of him being paraded around on TV, but he ended up doing it anyway, being very adamant about the self-proclaimed fact that he needed to. While appearing on these talk shows, he acted even stranger than he usually would. Sometimes he would simply ignore the host's question and just stare at the audience with blank eyes until the host eventually snapped him out of it by touching his shoulder or something of the sort. People online defended this, saying he had been mysteriously gone for 4 years. Of course, there were going to be some things he would have to get used to. The attention, for one. His parents were very supportive of him and whatever he felt he liked doing, but they were also very protective, understandably so. Every time he went somewhere decently far away, they came with. Personally, I'm just glad that they never joined when he would come over to my place. Now, I know what you're wondering. Where has he been for years? Well, your guess would be as good as mine. The police, along with special investigators, have been interrogating Michael a lot, and I mean a lot. According to rumor, they have been interrogating basically everybody, but they still don't have even a shred of evidence as to who the perpetrator could be. I've tried talking to Michael about it, but it must have been incredibly traumatizing, because every time I try to ease into the subject, he ends up freaking out and having a panic attack, or just getting oddly mad and leave. After a few attempts, I decided that it would do no good for me to ask him about it, and I would just wait until he was ready to tell me. And even though I desperately wanted to know what had happened, it was okay if that never happened. I would leave that to his psychiatrist from now on. One other thing about Michael's behavioral changes since coming back is that he sometimes acts abnormally when we do something that he enjoys. I took him to the skating park just last week, since skating is something that he used to love, and he kept repeating with even intervals, "I like skating, Thomas." Maybe you don't find that too strange, but the thing is, my name isn't Thomas, it's Isaac. I would correct him every time, and every time he would apologize and blame it on his brain being scrambled since he got on the meds the psychiatrist was giving him. Those must be some strong meds, I thought, even through all the odd behavior and lost memories. I still see my best friend. He's still in there, and I will be there for him every day, showing my support until he is fully healthy. One day, I decided it could do him some good to go out, drink, and just relax. Surprisingly, he agreed and asked me to pick him up at 9. When I got to his house, it was 10 to 9, and he was still getting ready. So I sat down in the kitchen with his mom as she was getting dinner ready. We talked about everything under the sun, and I eventually brought up Michael's odd behavior at the skating park. What kind of meds does that psychiatrist give him? Anyway, don't get me wrong, Michael's been acting out of sorts even before those, but it seems even worse now. I mean, he called me Thomas repeatedly. Michael's mother, Martha, gave me a look that told me she had no idea what I was talking about. What are you talking about, Isaac? Michael hasn't had any medication prescribed. The doctors told us that would more than likely escalate his strange behavior, and it could also worsen his PTSD. By the mention of that last word, she lowered her gaze and looked incredible. Why, sad for a split second, but when she looked up again, the sadness was gone and she acted like nothing had happened. Then she went back to chopping vegetables for supper. I think it's good that you are taking him out to have some fun. You're a good friend, Isaac. Just remember to be careful. I promise we'll be as careful as we possibly can, I added with a hint of sarcasm, and Martha smiled genuinely. I didn't have any time to ponder what had just been said before Michael came jogging down the stairs. You ready? I asked him. Yeah. Let's go. We said goodbye to Martha and got out to my car. That's when it hit me. Michael hasn't had any medication prescribed. That's what his mother said. Either he lied to me or he lied to her. But why I had to know? Hey, Michael, what's up? You know, the skate park, where you told me you were on about that whole Thomas thing because of the meds you were taking. Yeah, I mean, vaguely I am. I'm not. I gave him a deeply concerned look and almost ran us off the road. So much for being careful, I thought. I don't feel like talking about it, he finally said. He looked distant. Well, that was new and strange. What just happened? All right, that's okay, man. No pressure. We soon arrived at the club, and the incident in the car was practically forgotten. Any troubles could wait until tomorrow, or even longer for that matter. Tonight was about relaxing, taking a load off, and just having fun. We walked up to the bar to do some shots first of all and then see where things went. We decided on tequila. We downed a few shots and generally had a good time. Michael seemed to loosen up a bit when all of a sudden something felt wrong about him. He seemed way drunker than he should be. We had only done 3 shots so far. Michael was always quite the heavyweight when it came to drinking. When he spoke, he slurred badly. His pupils twitched to the sides and up and down. It freaked me out. He looked like he was having a breakdown, much worse than any of the panic attacks he had experienced before. I grabbed his holder and gently shook it. Michael. I had to scream to make myself audible. The club was deafening. What's happening? Are you all right? He didn't respond. His twitching got worse and worse until he fell from the bar stool down onto the floor, his whole body shaking violently, foam spurting from his mouth in waves. It seemed endless. Other people were now noticing what was happening. They helped me carry him outside, and someone called the ambulance. I was so shocked I just stood there, looking at him, feeling completely helpless. What if he died? They couldn't gie my best friend back to me just to take him away a month later. That couldn't happen. As the ambulance drove away, I stood still for a long time. Must have been like 30 minutes just watching. And gee, the road it had driven off on. They didn't let me come with them because they didn't want any distractions or interferences. At the same time as that had pissed me off, I understood them. I suddenly began sobbing uncontrollably and kicked a lone trash can into a wall as I screamed straight out into the night. An idea popped into my head as I stood there, devastated, and not a good one. Instead of going to the hospital to sit with my friend, or even informing his parents, which I was sure the hospital would do themselves anyway, I decided to head out to the forest where he had gone missing. What was I searching for, you might ask? Nothing, anything, answers to all the questions spinning in my head. What had happened to Michael out in those woods? Who or what had done this to him? Was there any way for things to go back to normal? I asked myself that last thing over and over as I, in a rage, drove down to the woods. I parked my car between a river and the beginning of the forest, grabbed a finally useful flashlight from the glove box, and started walking. If Michael was a heavyweight when it came to drinking, then I was a very lightweight, and I was very tipsy from the few shots we had had. This made wandering through the woods alone at night more terrifying than I had anticipated. The wind howled, and the leaves shook wildly in the trees. Just breathe Isaac in and out. Somehow talking made the forest even more unnerving, and just as I spoke, I thought I could hear footsteps behind me. There's not a damn thing here, I told myself in an attempt at mustering some courage. But I knew that was a lie. Something was here. Something had taken Michael. Something had broken him, and it felt like that something Washington is watching me right this moment. Footsteps again, or no, not footsteps, dragging. Something was dragging against the ground, close to me. That something was breathing heavily, wheezing in long, ragged breaths. I spun around, shining the flashlight all around me, but I could see nothing. Another sound could be heard right in front of me, a twig breaking. Something was coming towards me in pitch black darkness, and it was moving slowly, very slowly. Isaac, a hoarse voice was calling my name. It sounded weak, dying. I slowly walked toward it, and what I saw made my heart stop in my chest. It was Michael, lying on the ground, a bloody mess. Apart from the wounds, he looked almost identical to when I last had seen him, for years ago. I didn't even know what to think. My head was spinning. It's not real. Why, you're not real, I finally blurted out. Isaac, I'm so glad it was you who found me. I'm so glad I could see you last time. He had lines drawn all over him, like someone had taken his measurements, taken his size. I don't know why, but I believed what I saw. I believed he was real. Tears streaming down my face as I down beside him, I asked, if you're real, then who is the Michael that came back? I barely believed my own words as I spoke them. They gave me shivers to the bone. The Michael on the ground was trying to speak, but he was too weak. Instead, he rolled over. On his back there was a scar, right beside his spine. I breathed in sharply as I realized and collapsed in grief over Michael's now dead body. That scar had been there ever since. Michael was 5. I remembered that the Michael who returned didn't have one. Story 4. Asylum. Gavin slid the back panel of his digital recorder open and gently placed 2 small batteries into the matching slots. Clicking the plastic back into place, he pushed the power button, and the electronic screen blinked alive, emanating with a pale blue light that brightened the dark night air around. His hand gazing up into the brisk autumn night sky, Gavin was amazed at how much the colossal structure in front of him blocked out the twinkling stars, like a gaping black void consuming the essence of the universe around it. He knew that this night was special. In the local town of Riddleburg, the elders spoke of this night in whispers and warned their children not to venture near the asylum. Past dusk, any traveler who questioned the locals about the asylum and the date of October 14th, 1964 was met with a flurry of urges to keep their distance. The only shred of information they would divulge is that what had happened at the asylum was so terrible that it had permanently scarred the surrounding area. Gavin had received these warnings, and he had listened to the stories, but he was still determined to record the enigma that was Perth Asylum. Fumbling with his backpack, Gavin pulled out a plastic flashlight and clicked it on. The bright beam created a cone of light that Gavin flashed over the tall arch of the structure in front of him, revealing an entrance doorway with lettering that spelled Perth Asylum, letter NG, out a small sigh that warmed the air around. His mouth turning into an ethereal mist, Gavin shouldered his backpack and with a determined stride pushed the entrance door open and entered the building. Gavin stood on the other side of the ancient doorway looking at a decaying entrance atrium. As he swung his flashlight's beam across the room, it lit up the columns of dust gradually floating NG to the ground from the rotten ceiling. Lowering the flashlight's bright gaze, he revealed the reception desk covered in patient files and a layer of gray dust. Stepping over to the desk, Gavin and slowly dusted off one of the yellowing patient files. Most of the writing was illegible, but what he could make out was a name, Dr. Richter. As he brought the paper closer to his face to try and decipher more, a soft voice resonated out of the darkness. "You need to help?" Dropping the paper, he swung his flashlight around the room, eager to confront the source of the intrusio. And now standing with his back to the desk, Gavin stared into the darkness with a puzzled expression. There was nobody to be seen. He glanced down at the recorder in his hand and, confirming that it was still recording, started to turn back towards the desk. What he saw next both excited and stunned him. The first thing he noticed was the gentle odor of perfume weaving itself into his nostrils as if to beckon his attention, as if each sense was being tested. A barely audible help whisper its way into his ears. Then, for a brief moment, there was an image of a nurse standing behind the reception desk. Gavin could make out every detail in this woman's attire, the white blouse and a red sweater with worn elbows from a life of constant patient care. Her hair pinned into the traditional 60s-style bun with a wavy strand drifting into the front of her black frame glasses. What caught Gavin's attention most, though, was the unusual red stain in the midsection of her chest that seemed to glisten with the reflection of his flashlight bouncing off of it. He blinked and she was gone. All that remained was her distinct image, photographed in his mind. For a brief minute he heard that soft voice again. His ears strained, but all he could make out was a soft help Furiously rubbing his eyes, Gavin blinked and slowly let his eyes readjust to the dark space he was in. Oh, staring at that head seemed to swallow a human being. Still staring into this dark abyss, Gavin's mind continuously looped the memory of what had just happened to him. The image still clear in his mind, he seemed able to only focus on one aspect of this spectral woman, the glistening red stain on her chest, which Gavin now presumed to be blood. This apparition seemed to be in distress, calling out to him as if to urge him to assist in her escape of a torturous hell. Kneeling down next to the manila patient file that he dropped, Gavin extended his hand out and tenderly wrapped his fingers around the crinkling paper. The examination of this documentation had resulted in the phantom's apparition, so perhaps it would yield another clue to his spectral visitor's distress, or a cryptic message. Placing the flashlight firmly between his teeth, Gavin gingerly opened the manila folder and began to read the documents it contained. As he furiously read, his eyes became wider and held a look of pure astonishment. The files referenced a patient, Miles Slander, who had been in the asylum's care on the year of its closing. According to the file, Miles suffered from acute schizophrenia and was often lost in delusions of his own creation. His primary caretaker also had a reference in the file, including a picture, and this is what had shocked Gavin. The picture, faded from age with torn edges, still clearly portrayed an image of the same nurse who had just moments before presented herself to Gavin. Her attire was exactly the same aside from a lack of the blotchy red stuff in her chest. Fumbling with the paper, Gavin began to read more about this nurse's report on Mr. Slanders. There were boxes checked off with a steady mark in pen, most noting the proper procedure of care such as medication distribution and hygiene care. Flipping the paper over to scan for more, Gavin discovered what seemed to be a note hastily scrawled on the rear, clearly labeled for another nurse, perhaps a friend. The note read, "Janet, he has gone too far this time. I have put aside my own emotions to assist Dr. Richter in his heinous studies into the human mind through experimental lobotomies and electroshock, but I will not allow him to administer a patient in my care with the contents of that syringe. For the good of Miles and the asylum, I have hidden the vials in the morgue behind the first cadaver drawer. Please, if you still care for my well-being at all, retrieve it on your night shift for me so I can relay it to the authorities." This message was the clue Gavin needed. He now knew his next step in documenting the paranormal in Pierce Asylum. He was going to venture to the morgue where perhaps this nurse's manifestation would once appear. Placing the envelope in his backpack, Gavin shouldered the bag and stood up. Returning the flashlight to his hand, he flashed the beam behind the desk where he spotted a map of the asylum. Stepping closer, he could see that the morgue was only down the hall and around the corner, an easy walk that would only take moments. Practically vibrating with excitement, Gavin turned and stepped away half hour. On the map, he shone his flashlight down the hallway and grinned to himself. This was the break he was waiting for. Suddenly his bright, guiding flashlight beam flickered and then disappeared. Gavin and shook the flashlight. There was no way the batteries could be dead. He had just replaced them. Suddenly Gavin began to get an unsteady feeling as an aroma of sulfur reached his nostrils. Looking up from his flashlight, Gavin noticed a strange anomaly beginning to form in the darkness in front of him. The black, consuming darkness seemed to be twitching and coming alive. Gavin stood still. His feet seemed to be rooted to the floor, unresponsive to his brain's frantic commands to run. He wanted to run. He wanted to scream, but it seemed as if he was completely paralyzed, forced to watch the terrifying show preparing itself. In front of him, the darkness began to swirl and dance, the cyclone growing in strength, almost as if it was sucking the energy out of the room. Gavin began to notice that his breathing was becoming more and more ragged, as if the void was siphoning the precious oxygen that he needed to survive. The last thing Gavin saw as he felt himself losing consciousness was a black figure suddenly standing directly in front of him. Gavin's eyes shot open, and he sat straight up. He looked down to see his flashlight sitting on the ground next to his leg, the beam still on, bright and powerfully, cutting through the darkness. Scrambling, he groped the light and swung it around the room as he flung himself to his feet. There was no trace that any figure or vortex had ever entered this room's atmosphere, as the only disturbed dust seemed to be the dust gently falling from Gavin's quick elevation. Shaking his head to clear his mind, Gavin remembered the ghostly nurse and the morgue. No dark entity was going to keep him from finding out the truth and perhaps helping the nurse move on. Firmly gripping his flashlight, Gavin charged into the dark hallway and swiftly arrived at the heavy steel door marked morgue. Swallowing a small lump that had begun to form in his throat, Gavin gently pushed the door open. He confidently stepped into the room and turned towards the small shelf of drawers that once held the unfortunate casualties of the asylum. Stopping in his tracks, Gavin's jaw fell open slightly as, standing in front of the drawers, was the apparition of the nurse. She stood with her hands clasped together and looked up at Gavin with a sad look. Gavin struggled to find his voice and then let out, "Who are you? You wanted help? I can help you." The solemn-looking nurse gently stared into Gavin's eyes and opened her mouth. "It's too late now. You can't help me. I'm sorry." Gavin looked at her with a shocked look. "What do you mean it's too late? I can still help. I read your note about Dr. Richter." The ethereal nurse seemed to smile a small, sad smile as she stared into Gavin's eyes. She stepped back from the drawer she was standing in front of and whispered, "See for yourself." Gavin looked at the drawer and then back at the apparition. He slowly walked over to the closed drawer and placed his hands on the latch. Gavin stood for a moment and held his breath, preparing for what he was about to do. Catching his breath, Gavin firmly gripped the latch, clicked it open, and pulled. Though at the cadaver drawer, the drawer was heavy, heavier than Gavin anticipated it to be, and he quickly saw why. Laying on the exposed board was a body. Gavin looked in disgust at the nurse. Wattower was still standing composed to the side of the drawer. She glanced at the body and beckoned him to examine it. Gavin picked up his flashlight, his hands shaking and trembling as he shined the beam onto the body's head. Gavin screamed and fell to the floor. He looked at the nurse, who still stood composed, and shouted, "No, no, what is this? What did you do?" She continued to look at him in a sad expression, and then took a few steps towards him and knelt down. She looked long into his eyes and whispered, "Now you understand why you can't help me anymore. Why it is too late." She stood up and looked at the body. The corpse's head was concaved from a wound still fresh with dripping blood. Now you understand why you can never leave this place." Gavin stood and took one more look at the horrific body in front of him, oozing with blood, dripping from the pieces of skull protruding through the skin. The body of a young man who was once filled with emotion and energy. The body of Mion he once knew. His body, story 5. The impervious. The thin ones, the impervious, were watching. I would never be safe from them. They were there, they were always there, the warped, the dead, the undead, whatever the fuck they were. They had been there for as long as I could possibly remember. Before I get into detail about what I am about to explain, I suppose I should lines you my name, but I unfortunately cannot tell anyone my real name. The impervious will know. You may call me Laura. From the very beginning, the impervious had kept a close watch on me with their empty eyes or eye sockets. My apologies on jumping a bit ahead of myself. The impervious are honestly the most absolutely terrifying thing I have ever come across in my entire life. They are tall, very tall. Their height is so unbelievably inhuman, but they are always hunched over so that they appear to be about 4 or 5 feet vertically speaking. The impervious are very, very thin and bone. Why, with bones nearly protruding from their flesh. They also have white, rough, and sometimes scaly skin. It is very dull and devoid of life. Their arms are elongated and nearly all bone, alone. With their legs, but their arms are much greater in their length. They have lengthy nails as well, or claws, which would be a more appropriate term. One claw is always larger and more menacing than the rest that they own. There is no hair whatsoever upon their bodies, other than the top of their head, not even any facial hair. Normally, the hair on the top of the head of an impervious is very long, messy, and usually straight for the most part. They have long, black, deadly quills laced in the network of their backbones, threatening and possibly their most lethal weapon, other than their claws and their teeth. Oh God, their teeth. Their teeth just might be the main reason for my internal struggles and madness. I can't count how many nightmares I've had just from their teeth alone. My heart is pounding as I am writing this, and goosebumps are beginning to raise, but I must go on. The world must know about these hellish creatures that manage to inhabit our earth. Our teeth, they take up most of their face. They are sharp and usually bloody. A sick, terrifying grin is what makes up most of the head of an impervious, along with a large and thin, snake-like ebony tongue. Their lips are black, their nose sunken in and almost showing bones. Their eyes do not exist. A light, glowing soft blue light takes up where their eyes should be, inside the sockets. The most disturbing thing about them, perhaps, is their legs. The legs of an impervious are reversed, and their feet are arched up, and like a canine or a feline's sharp toenails. They smell of death. In the beginning, the impervious weren't always in existence. They first originated due to multiple experiments in witchcraft. A young man that had been raised by his uncle Michael most of his life recently did numerous amounts of countless and endless research, but the main research had been passed down for a few generations onto him. The man's name, I can tell you, but only his first name. He calls himself Darius. He discovered what makes the impervious tick, and almost pinned down exactly what they truly are and how they were fully heated. What a fool. They were not created by science. They were mostly created using necromancy. What kind of science could possibly create a hellish monster like an impervious? It is simply impossible. Perhaps a scientist, or maybe even multiple scientists, could perform multiple procedures and experiments on a human being or other animal to make them appear to be like one. But there just is no way that one could possibly fully resemble and have the personality and abilities of a true impervious. First off, the impervious do not have any genitals, nor do they have nipple S or belly buttons. They have no creases or imperfections in or on their body other than bones sticking out. They cannot reproduce by normal scientific and humanistic animalistic eyes. They cannot have sexual intercourse with sexual organs of their own, for they have none. Whether or not they have sexual desires is a complete mystery, since they do not speak. They make noises, but they do not speak as humans and some other animals do. The amount of impervious out there is immeasurable. They cannot breed as humans do, but they can spread their likeness around a lot faster and more efficiently, but they usually do not do so. I personally think that the main reason Darius' family and others, including me at one point, believe that they were a product of science, since they spread their likeness and curse upon others throughout biting them, was because they simply had no other explanation. It isn't just a bite, though they bite them, then tear their bodies apart in a literal sense, devouring their whole countenance. What is left of the original human's body is nothing like it was before. They are now chunks broken, with bones and meat. The only thing left of them, after a great long while or sometimes even a short amount of time, the dark necromancy and magic that had originally created the impervious begins its work. The leftover remains of the person's body mold themselves into a white shell of a bane, and it morphs itself into a true impervious. With their abilities and looks and all, they are not alive, they are corpse. As they are dead. This is why this cannot be a product of science. Sure, people have been revived before from technically dying, but their revival was done in a completely logical and scientifically proven sense. The curse of the impervious, the thin ones, is not scientific. It can only be explained through magic. If you do not believe that necromancy and any other form of magic is real, I pity you. I pity the day that you come across an impervious yourself. They do not always kill you. They do not always even bite you. Most of the times that an impervious will come out of it, hiding is at night, usually around midnight. They like to lurk in the shadows, usually in the woods, but they often enjoy creeping into someone's home. They have many supernatural abilities. So this is quite the easy task. Impervious are capable of materializing into an actual shadow and literally becoming one and nothing else. One way to tell if an impervious is near or wishing to toy with you is if you manage to see your shadow, and it is much taller than what it usually is. There are multiple things that can warn you if one of them wishes to come out and play with you. Other than the shadow manipulation, you will become sick, even if not becoming seriously ill. Some of your technology may act up, such as your internet's Wi-Fi or your cell phone, or even a video game. Hallucinations, when they are near or have chosen you, are quite common. If you have any of the above symptoms or a few of them and your nose begins to bleed, I can only say I told you so. If you do not heed my warnings and think that this is merely a joke, so how would someone protect themselves from an impervious? Honestly, if one has chosen you, there is no way of getting tea of it. You are eternally damned. If one has chosen you as their own and claimed you, the only possible way of avoiding the impervious is to guard yourself before they begin to follow you. If you're Siki, and they have only recently become interested in you, you may protect yourself. The truth about the impervious, from what I personally feel, is that they are humans that have become demonic beings through necromancy and black magic. Most things that would guard you from a true, rebellious, and angry demon would protect you from an impervious. I would say that a ring of salt would protect you, but that would be an absolute lie. I have tried this once before. I fully managed to gain complete protection from them, and it laughed in its sadistic way. It still sends chills down my spine, just remembering and thinking about it. The only true way to protect yourself from one, so that you won't become one or lose your soul forever, is to. At this point, the reader of this passage had stopped. No one knows why they did so, or what happened. Whoever reads this, including myself, may think it is just a joke or a hoax, but it truly is not. I have seen one beforehand. Dee drew a sketch of an impervious. They are real. You must protect yourself. I don't know how to, but I will try to figure it out and tell as many people online and in real life that I possibly can. I am only posting this on here because I know a lot of people go onto this site and like to read stories like these, but I promise you, this is real. One has been following me. Help me. Asterisk, what you are about to read is a note from Dexter Moloch. Asterisk, I had found the first original document from Laura herself. Her true first name is Alice. That much I was able to discover, and the second person that had written it is anonymous and unknown to me. I don't know how this document, joined together, managed to appear on my laptop, but it did. One night while I was in the middle of playing a PC game, I saw the word symbol on my taskbar. Blinking, I clicked on it, and it had the above text before my note before this document. I decided to do some research, but found little to none on the legendary impervious creatures. Eventually, I managed to come across one of them on my own. The description that Alice Laura had given was exact. Other than its hair, it had long, straight black hair that looked pristine and in place. I'm assuming that the impervious can have varying hairstyles just like humans can. I am merely guessing that this is because they were originally human. When I first got the beginning symptoms of an impervious being nearby, I panicked. My shadows became larger, even during the day. I got a brief cold, and my technology began acting up. I have experienced other symptoms also. I began getting bitten by bugs more often, and began seeing more and more spiders around my home, and even in my own bedroom. My fingers would get tingly, and my nails would ache along with my teeth. I began biting my nails to quell them. I began hearing light, soft whispers nearly everywhere I went that no one else heard. I didn't hear them in my head, but out loud and in the open. Chills would often shiver down my spine, and the hair would rise on the back of my neck. I would get goose pimples upon my flesh as well. I don't expect all the above symptoms to happen to everyone or to have happened to anyone that has experienced an encounter with an impervious. But I know for a fact I'm not the only one, and it has happened to the impervious that I'd seen and experienced myself firsthand, had told me it talks to me. I have actually seen it. My God, I can't believe they're real. It didn't tell me its name, but I'm still terrified. I keep hearing whispers about someone named Morpheus. I think that may be the name belonging to the impervious. I've only seen it in my dreams, though, but I always feel as though someone is watching me. It is August 10th, shortly after midnight as I'm posting this. My nose feels wet, and I feel something trickling down my nasal cavities. It's blood. I have been chosen. Story 6. Am I crazy? I do not know where to start. Usually, this would not be written for someone to read. However, I cannot trust my own judgment. What I write here is for you to discern. I will not have sufficient time to thoroughly document everything, nor is the true intention for this to be a piece of entertainment. I am only interested in understanding myself. Through your eyes, however, I will provide the most succinct but nondescript introduction to myself. A young lady, surname with Zorro, although not indicative of my actual name. It will be a substitute because of its anonymous connotations. I graduated recently, currently without a job, and staying in a small apartment with mother. Around me really is the most ordinary life, and that is why I tend to excite this cycle with new habits. I would sometimes learn the most bizarre skills, isolate myself for a day, which is a form of meditation, and literally anything to do with science. I am unsure whether it is worth mentioning that I used to play volleyball. Nonetheless, such personalities are still considered ordinary. The most peculiar would be the occasional sexless iron, but activities such as playing video games for a day is no different and is prominent in Japan. The word for it, I believe, is hikikomori. In my defense, my life was different to anyone else's, and none of the such I mentioned should be a reason to be considered as odd. One important fact I recall was that I possessed a hefty, aspen white, wooden box storing the valuables of my life. The container would fit my jewelry, small sculptures, a Yadigan switchblade, amongst other stray artifacts. The knife was bequeathed without notice, lacking an explanation to the rich essay, bull handle, dense with power and antiquity. Insignificant pieces were renounced to less transportable cardboard boxes, omitting the shovel. The gardening tool was too protrusive to be enclosed, and an ice or anywhere that was luridly visible, instead typically tessellated into the cramped kitchen to access a passage for walking. My parents had separated just recently, too, into respective apartments, and auctioning the long-standing home, they petitioned the possessions to detach the dying reminiscence. Father was determined to emigrate, and mother would remain. Having not yet flown the co-op, I could only reside with one. I loved them both dearly, but I will not disclose reasons for my verdict. Circumstances currently mean that the apartment will be a short duration derived from the former home. Ideally, I wished to live with both of my parents and never depart our old home. The reality of the situation, however, was grim with misfortune. The possibility of a miraculous happy ending was a child's fantasy. Repressing my depression evolved the habit, fostering my isolation into my addiction. I can carelessly admit that it is an addiction as I confess this to strangers, but addressing this to people I know is a terrifying notion, which is why I want to be alone. There is a particular quote by Pythagoras where silence is better than unmeaning words. It is ironic, however, that the quietest people will eventually become the least meaningful, because the quietest people are dead, although, if his quote could come true, my late dinners would have been much quieter. I will continue the remainder of this recount as events that followed from the first night of moving out. The day's proceedings were unexpectedly disappointing and unproductive. Father insisted a well-rested night in the old home. Father resided the master, Mother in the guest, and myself in my original bedroom. Before sleep, I maintain a routine to journal the thoughts and experiences of the day. Often this could occupy up to an hour due to becoming so immersed. The reason is not for producing a dear diary, but to develop a lucid dream state. I become the author of my own reality, building a consciousness to instinctively seize awareness. They are rare, the lucid dreams, sometimes residing somewhere in the chasm between reality, a very sharp reality, but outside of my control. These were the hybrid dreams, waking from a world so surreal that you become depersonalized. However, as rare as they are, successful lucid dreams are worth the endeavor. I succumbed to my sleep after an excess of hours had overtaken midnight, but my mind could not help but overthink the situation, urging a lucid dream while straining to relax my concentration to ease myself always backfires, causing my hearing to become acute and uncontrollably diverge on every inconsistent sound. That night the noise that stood out was a barrel, while audible, but steady thud outside my room. I could only comprehend the sound as the dampened and cautious creeping of one of my parents. Who was it? What were they doing this late? Where were they going? Generally, I can differentiate between mother and father by the personality in the walk. I focused hard on the pace, the weight, and the resonance of what type of shoe it was. I'd presume majority able to identify their parents. Likewise, but it is impossible when the culprit consciously masks their footsteps. The footsteps halted with the cautious squeaking of a door handle twisting, following the coarse brush between the door and the frame. The air surrounding me cooled as goosebumps swelled the front door, welcoming in the breeze. The struggle to sleep beyond this point was intolerable. I recall straining the effort and rising from my bed. Despite the chill, I would never wear my slippers from bed. Past creeping experience educated me that the barefoot causes the least noise. I investigated outside my room. Wheezing more gust through my door. The front door was ajar. I silently trotted to the door, giving it a shut and lock. I remember a creeping sense of panic suddenly, the fear of something supernatural. I returned to my room more hastily than I came, burrowing under quilts before I could realize the delayed adrenaline rush, whispering visions from the darkness to my ear. My toes had been cursed by the cold, adamantly far from reaches of my protection, and skimming the empty shadows. I wrenched the blankets tight, Washington, hiding until the fear became numb. There were no dreams that night. I rose uncomfortably early that morning, contradicting my habit as a midday snoozer. I instinctively invest a few minutes prod my phone, forcibly tinning my eyes to brightness. The events of the previous night would leak into my attention, tugging my curiosity out of bed. Who was it that opened the door last night? I crept to Mother's room, fast before my toes scald from morning floor frostbite. Before the guest room, I knocked politely. After an unanticipated reply, I entered to witness Mother sliding frayed paperbacks in 2 corrugated boxes distorted by the infused petrichor. My question regarding the incident last night returned a denial from Mother. Her veiled, reddish eyes blushed from hours of anguish. I offered to help, but she assured me that help was not needed. Mother later departed to transport a crowded sedan to the apartment, consigning me the thrilling onus of stuffing a bin liner with scrap. Ultimately, my boredom sidetracked into a nostalgia hunt under mattresses, beyond bookshelves, and finally the broom cupboard. My gaze dropped to greet a handle, extending downwards to behold a spade. Was this always here? It struck me as peculiar, too. Forget and misplace obvious belongings. Was this mine? Without a doubt. Adjusting the shovel revealed a chest slotted behind jewelry, small sculptures, a Yadigan switchblade, amongst other stray artifacts inside, bizarre, ambivalent. This was a query for Mother or Father to resolve. I would later neglect this, chasing treasures and trash against. Fatigued by night, I struggled on my lucid dream journal with half a fluttering eye open. Each yawn brushed with opportunity to faint at any moment. A snap shocked me with alert. Perhaps a pencil dropped, or from outside I concluded the vein in writing by expending the limited supply of concentration left. I stretched to switch off the light, bruising the room with patches of shadow and gray, eyes no longer straining to shade bright reflections. I sought for my bed through flickers of phosphine. A night sky beamed a moment of tranquility through the pane. It was silent. My rate climbed. Anxiety. My breathing grew audible. Hastening the panic, I felt dread at that moment, a fervent terror. A terror unlike anything I had ever experienced. I know times where I am heightened by a barking dog or by someone jumping out, but this was different because there was nothing there. A quote surfaced from my imagination: fear is wisdom in the face of danger. I panicked because where was the danger? Paranoia. Despite being in the safety of my own familiar home, I had never felt so vulnerable. I collapsed the blinds, bolted the door, and threw myself underneath the thin blanket. I have no memory of falling asleep, but I remember the dream, the clear memory of the surreal reality. I stood in the here of the living room. I saw my mother sleeping on the last couch in the barely furnished room, the white chest beside her arm, the beginning of a ritual. All details sharpened, my senses honed, aware of the wind's pulse and the lure's gravity. The room grew in clarity, breathing fear into my imagination. It sensed my distress, throbbing in reply. The realization of my peril, the present, this state, it was the chasm before the sumi of lucid dreams, producing the nightmare that I could not command. I glanced skyward, an unending depth to the starless sky outside. From a third-person view, I witnessed myself. I watched myself, poised by my mother. Beside us the wooden chest, the knife, and the shallow hole that was dug. I pressed the knife against her throat. Gently the blade bored deeper, splitting skin and enveloped By flesh there was no gush of blood, no hesitation in the hand either, the head jerked, the spine severed. A pause to witness the deafening silence. Nothing stirred, the blade scraped again. Saint the cross-section, burnishing the bone from gristle and rotted flesh. My hand caressed her cheek, watchfully clearing the hair from obscuring the eyes. The stare peering beyond me bullishly at heaven dwelling amongst the clods, one hand supporting behind the crown, the other opening the chest, emptied of its treasure. Mother's head, now nested in her vindictive prison, lowered gently into the dirt cavern. The body had vanished. It was done. I peeled opened my eyes, staring into where I stopped writing last night. I realized that I was seated upright at my desk, the bed sheets undisturbed upon my bed, having not been used last night. The blinds were not closed, despite my memory of doing so. Eyes damp, scared, recognizing only the ache in my heart from exhaustion. Was it me who opened that door? The first night, did I unconsciously take the shovel and knife? Did I awaken my own Mr. Hyde through experimenting with lucid dreams? From here on, I am writing in the present. I fear everything. I am scared that I can no longer differentiate the real and the imagination. I am afraid of what I have provoked, seeking the escape from reality. Through dreams, I am scared of myself. I can no longer trust myself. When I look outside my window, I can see the muddy trench from the dream. It is real. The box is there too. There is so much blood that it is no longer its former patchy white. It is real. Am I crazy? What is real? This journal is almost at its end. Anything written past here is meaningless. Father H. has been knocking on my door. Father is concerned for me, but he does not yet know what I have committed. I plan to run away when I open the door. I will have to open it soon. He is still pleading, with me, talking obliviously about how irresponsible it is to leave my belongings in the broom cupboard and for me to leave dirty slippers lying around. But he does not know that I murdered my own moth. He wants the door open. Did I do this? Do you believe me? Am I crazy? Story 7. The Black Figure. Freddy Krueger only stalks the victims that fear him, right? He plays with air dreams and gets into the deepest and darkest parts of their subconscious minds, right? That kind of stuff only happens in movies, right? Wrong. Even talking about what happened last month makes me feel nauseous and uneasy. It was no movie. It was real. We moved to Pernes on July 17, 2012. This is a little town located on the border of the United States and Canada. It is so small that it is not shown on maps of Ontario. Instead, it is just another area between Toronto and Mississauga. If you look on a map today, you will not find Pernes because the government decided to take it off of every map in 1994. This plan was confidential, which is the reason nobody is aware of Pernes. The only people that know about this town are the residents. Even though it is not on a map, it is still there. Chances are, if you've been in between Toronto and Mississauga, you've passed through Pernes. The first day at our house in Pernes, I spent the day exploring indoors and outdoors. The inside was beautiful. High ceilings, light wooded flooring, and red and black walls. The outside was beautiful as well. Large fountain, colorful garden, and a wide variety of statues. That night I sat in my warm sheets and dark blue comforter fit for a 16-year-old beau and thought about Arizona, where I used to live. It's been a day, and I had already missed the gorgeous orange sun and the cuspate saturated green cactus of Phoenix. I was reading IT by Stephen King, with the only light being the one emitted from the light holder clipped to my book. I had an uneasy feeling in my room reading about a killer clown approaching the last chapter. I turned off the light and closed my book to save the last leg for tomorrow night. As I lay in my bed trying to go sleep, strange enough, I had this scared feeling in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't a feeling of being watched, a feeling of being touched. It was just a feeling of being afraid for no reason. I had no reason to be scared, but I just was, which was weird. I ignored the feeling and went to sleep. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of my mother's voice. "Wake up, we're going fishing." I put on a t-shirt and khakis, gobbled up my breakfast, and loaded the car with the fishing tools. Landing on a dock on Lake Ontario, I took out my fishing rod, stuck a worm on the hook, and threw it in the blue water. I was very anxious as to what fish would be discovered first: alewife, burbot, northern pike, muskellunge, herring, 30 longme, newts, bass, and all I got was a bluegill. After 2 hours of fishing, something very mysterious occurred. To this day, I do not understand why this happened, and I can't recollect all the sights and sounds of that moment. I attach grub to the hook and dip the rod into the cold water. I rotate the handle and wait. 5 minutes pass. 10 minutes pass. 20 minutes pass. As starting to give up. 1 hour later, I felt heaviness on the pole. Alert, I perk up and reel in whatever was connected to the hook. To my dismay, a horrifying sight slapped me in the face. Not being able to understand exactly what it was, it spoke to me. "Help! Take me home," it whispered with wide eyes and a terrified expression under its wet, black hair. I made out what it was. T was a girl. She looked about 13 years old. She looked like she had white skin with a gray tint. Blood was pouring down her face from her tear ducts, and her mouth was stitched into a smile, but I could tell she was scared. I dropped her back in the water from fear, and I screamed and fell to the floor. I awoke in a hospital bed with my eyes staring at my flushed face on a metal desk next to the bed. My father walked in the room and asked, "Are you okay? What happened? Do you remember anything?" Where am I?" I questioned. "You fainted at the dock today. What happened?" I tried to remember what had happened. Then I remembered the girl. "You didn't see her?" "See who?" my mother asked. "The girl." I reeled her in, and she whispered help. "Take me home," really loud. You guys were staring right at her. That's all I remember. I stare at their confused faces. You really don't remember?" "No, sorry," my father answers. "I was confused." Now for a fact I was not lucid dreaming, because I remember everything before I reeled the girl in. That feeling hit me, that feeling of fear. After my parents leave the hospital room, I lay in my bed and try to go to sleep when suddenly the lights in the hospital go off for about 3 seconds and come back on. Strange enough, during those 3 seconds I felt a cold hand grab my leg. A quick shiver crawled up my spine and I screamed. Seconds later, the doctor ran inside of my room and asked what had happened. Okay, so when the lights went off, I began What the doctor interrupted. When the lights went off, The doctor laughed. The lights never went off. You were probably just sleeping. You want me to call your parents, Anne? What? No, I felt a cold hand grab my ankle. Is anybody else in here with me? She looks around. Nobody was in the room. With me? She checked under the bed, in the bathroom, and in every nook and cranny of the room. But I know what I felt. Okay, she said. If anything else happens, we'll be sure to take notice. Please, for now, go to sleep. Good night. And she left the room. I was by myself, or so I thought. The next day, I was released from the hospital. My mom and dad had assured me that everything was okay, that I was perfectly fine, perfectly healthy. They warned me that if I had another episode like that again, they would take me to see a psychiatrist. I went to my room nervous and shaking. I was distraught and confused. I analyzed everything that had happened the day before. Seeing the helpless girl and feeling the hand grab my ankle. Maybe I was going crazy. Maybe I actually was dreaming, I thought for a moment. I couldn't have been dreaming because what had happened was too realistic. Maybe I was going crazy. Hang it as my parents never saw a girl at the end of the hook. If anything like this happens again, I told myself I wouldn't tell my parents because I don't want to be taken to a shrink. I sat in my bed on the verge of crying. I was actually scared. Not being able to sleep that night, I kept the light on. To ease my mind, I painted on the walls in my room, being old wallpaper. I decora Ted over it with random paintings of my favorite things, such as a fishing rod, popcorn, football, and baseball. After all, this wallpaper would be peeled off at some point in time, 1 in the morning approached, and everyone was asleep. I was still painting the walls, and that's when I saw it. I slowly walked toward the scratch marks on the wall next to the door when I realized they weren't there an hour ago. I scratch away at the wallpaper and see a line in the wooden wall. I peel more wallpaper off only to reveal a door. I grabbed a hanger and straightened the head of the hanger and stuck the pointy side in the crack and pulled open the door. Dust surrounded my face and cobwebs stuck to the wall. The real estate agent never told us about this room. It was creepy. It had an old smell to it. It was very plain and small. Not much to it. Just an empty room. I searched for more trapdoors or secret passageways only to find one hidden in the ground. I climbed down using my cell phone I had in my pocket as a light. I was scared, I admit, but I had to explore this place, seeing as it is a room in my room. I climbed down the creaky ladder into darkness. That feeling of fear hit me. The only light was coming from the top of the ladder because my phone went off. Other than that, it was total blackness. I turned on my phone. From a few feet away I heard something. It sounded like weeping or squealing. I couldn't tell what it was until I turned the light of my phone to face the source of the sound. When I saw it, I dropped everything. Strapped in a chair was a girl, rope tied around her hands and legs. She squirmed and squealed with tape across her mouth. Under the duct tape appeared to be a smile, but I could tell she wasn't happy. She moved her mouth up and down trying to get out of the duct tape. All of a sudden, 2 long black hands with long black sharp nails wrapped around the girl's face and ripped off the tape. I was too in shock to run away, too scared to get attacked if I even try. All I remember was staring with a blank expression. My whole body was too scared to move. A whole form on the ground in front of he. The black figure untied the rope. As he untied the rope, the girl spoke. She had long black wet hair, a great tint to her pale skin, and appeared as if she were crying blood. She looked like so. Mion tried to drown her. She looked like she had just walked through purgatory. She was the girl I saw when we were fishing. You didn't help me, she said. It's time tea. Oh, go home now, she said. The figure pushed her in and stared at me for a while. She went home. The creature's eyes were the only things I could see in comparison to his completely black form. The eyes got bigger, quite big. In fact, that I had soon realized that he was approaching me. As he got closer, his eyes seemed to light up the darkness. They were so bright I could see his body. He appeared to be a human figure, but without detail. All I remember were his long fingers and lengthy black fingernails, and his eyes. Don't you see? He spoke in a deep whisper. You're complete. Healy oblivious. A 20-foot-long tongue fell out of his mouth and hissed. Blood began to pour down his long gray snake-like tongue right in front of my face. As he spoke, there was a deep rumble. I've been sending you messages, trying to get you to come home with us. Goodbye for now, he finished. That feeling of fear disappeared, and the figure went with it. I snapped out of that trance and took a deep breath. The room vanished. The next day, I was confused. The whole situation I was in confused me. What was home? How did the girl find my house? Too many questions polluted my mind, and it wasn't until months later when I figured out the answers. I was told that, like Freddy Krueger, the devil is only present when you fear him. He tries to get you to visit his house to stay for eternity. We call it the nether world, the infernal regions, a place of torment. Purgatory, he calls it home. That was the answer to all of my questions. If you review all the messages in my story, you'd be able to realize that Satan was at work during the first few days when I encountered the girl. But you'd also realize that during the last leg of my story, that black figure was the devil himself.